Hey, Zora, why didn't you tell me that we had guests?
Forgive me, sir. It must have slipped my mind.
Not a problem. Don't worry about it. Okay, so this week, it's so funny. As I'm getting used to Discovery and coming into an understanding of what Discovery is and genuinely accepting it on its own merit, they go and change up the formula. So this season continues to be the anti-Discovery season, and by that I mean today's episode. We're going to get into it. It's not bad at all. It's actually a really good episode. Funny thing is, the A-plot is probably the least interesting thing about it. What's up, my know-it-alls? Welcome aboard the USS Know-It-All. I am, of course, your captain here in the 32nd century, Mr. Know-It-All. All right, so let's get into the episode. Today's episode this is episode 6, and it's called Whistlespeak. Now, in Star Trek, there are several tent poles, if you will. Some people might call them tropes or cliches. I like to think of them more along the lines of things that you can expect, signposts, if you will, that tell you you're watching Star Trek. The bottle episode, the time travel episode, last week was both, and the will they, won't they violate the Prime Directive with an alien species episode, and that's this week. So turns out the next clue, they're having trouble with that little vial of liquid that we saw last week, and so what happens is Burnham she transports and has that transport redirected to Kovac. And Kovac explains to her, using a really fun 20th century legal pad, which I thought was so clever. I'm not sure how that survives into the future, but hey, whatever. He writes a list. He goes, I happen to have found the names of the scientists. Having the names of the scientists kind of really helps figure things out. They find one of the scientists actually turns out he was a Danubian, and specifically he specialized in building water towers, weather towers that would help planets who need it protect against certain things by specifically creating weather of a specific type or helping instigate that in the atmosphere. Okay, all very technical, but it helped them realize where their next clue might end up being. And they tracked down a planet specifically that has a pre-warp society, which means, that's right, the Prime Directive comes into play. Okay? Now, I want to lay that whole thing out. I'm not going to go step by step here because, frankly, like I said at the head, I'm not going to even bury the lead. There's two things happening here. There's the overall plot that Discovery is on that we know about, which is searching for this thing to stop the progenitor technology, all that stuff. Then there's a B plot. The B plot has to do with Dr. Culber. Ever since Dr. Culber's experience on Trill, specifically when Janal went into him and he was sort of that entire encounter has begun to open something in terms of a spiritual awakening. So he's trying his best, and that honestly is the much more interesting storyline. There is a little bit of echo in terms of, because that's honestly, the best Star Trek does that. You parallel, actually the best writing realistically does that. You parallel the circumstances happening in one plot to another, and the idea being that the stories kind of complement one another. So while Dr. Culber's dealing with his own spiritual awakening, you have Burnham and Tilly, who goes with her, who have to go down to this planet and they have to deal with stuff. Now, the one thing they don't know that they're going to have to deal with is this is a highly religious society. Specifically, the weather thing that they're looking for, where potentially there were 5 of them on this planet. And on the planet with the 5 of them, the other 4 have gone down. This one is about to fail also. When it does, the planet will essentially become relatively uninhabitable, or at the very least, the people will have to change significantly in order to even remotely try to survive. All that being said, they worship the gods and see the plateau that this thing is built on as being the sort of the tower of the gods. And so there's this whole spiritual through line, and I really love it because they meet a young lady who is a devout member of this society. The title gets the episode gets its name from the way this community speaks through long distances. They communicate. They don't have radio. They don't have anything like that. So what they do is they have to whistle. And in the whistling, there is a language that's there. So the universal translators have been to figure out how to do sort of figures learns how to speak that language so that they can better understand what the communications that are happening. And so they end up having to go to this. They meet this group who's headed to the summit. While they're there, you find out they have to figure out how to get into the thing because only the spiritual leaders are allowed inside, unless you complete what's called the challenge or the race. So there's a thing. It's really funny because I'm sitting here going, I think to myself, what kind of writer's room sat there and just said to themselves, we have to find out a way for these people. We have to figure out a way for her to compete for this and that. And they come up with this whole thing. Now, I feel like the race is sort of a contrivance. I mean, it totally is a contrivance. But I mean, like, I feel like if you were to take all of the episodes like this and line them up, I'm totally sure that my homeboy over at Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is going to do that someday. But you take all of these kind of Prime Directive type episodes and you put them together, this is probably the least creative way to do it, or in terms of like the least it's always a challenge, it's a fight, it's a political thing, it's something having to do with other things like that. This is literally a foot race. Like, I'm not kidding. They have water stations and everything, which is ultimately part of the plot. Burnham, on this little race, realizes that the moss on one side of a thing, the closer they get to the summit, is yellow or whatever, and she says if this thing is broken, there's a chance it's leaking radiation of some sort.
Look at the moss on the trees. Most of it's blue, but some of it's yellow. If the control metal were 800 years old, it would leak radiation. And if it is leaking radiation, it would be causing mutations.
As a result, it could be that, so she takes herself out by drinking water at one of those little water checkpoints. Now, here's the thing. This is a spiritual outing. This is a test, if you will, to see if you're worthy to go in in order to appease or talk to the gods to help bring the rains. So what happens is, because of how their legends are built, you have to take some. It honestly looks like a square piece of white gum, and it makes you thirsty. You immediately are like, I can't. Like it takes all the liquid. You have to complete this thing dying of thirst, because that's how this all started. The gods were appeased by the sacrifice, they brought the rains, all that nonsense. And so what ends up happening is Burnham's like, I'm out, until he has to continue, because you don't know if the clue's inside the temple. They gotta fix this thing to help keep everything from breaking down or whatever else. So when Burnham goes and checks it out, she finds it. It's a relatively simple fix. There's a C plot having to do with Adira and Raynor up on the ship. Raynor sort of helping Adira find themselves in terms of where they're giving them self-confidence and whatnot. It's fine. It's incidental. It doesn't literally. It's as inconsequential as it sounds. Me literally wasting the time to tell it to you. The other girl, the devout girl they found, she decided to take the race. Her father's trying to tell her not to do it. She does it anyway. This mirrors the situation Tilly's got going on at the academy, where one of her students is debating whether to leave the academy in order to go off and do something, and Tilly doesn't agree with it. So she wants to be as supportive as she can be for this young lady, sort of a balance of trying to say, well, if I can't help my student, let me at least help you, okay? Oh, Tilly. So what happens? When they get to the temple thing, they have to complete the last part of the thing with water. The girl spills it. Tilly gives her some of her water because the rules say you can't complete unless you actually carry the water. You can't complete with an empty bowl. So what happens? They both go in. As usually happens with these things, and I probably could have predicted it, they're going to be a sacrifice. Oh yeah, you get trapped inside the temple thing. Air gets rushed out of it, thus suffocating you. All to appease the gods. That whole piece also felt contrived. Like I felt like okay, I get the sacrifice thing, but at the same time, it's whatever. All right. So now, ultimately, they end up figuring this whole thing out, and then there's now we come back to, this is where the A plot begins to make sense in terms of mirroring with the B plot, and we're going to get to the B plot, because like I said, the reason I'm handling the B plot last, it's the most interesting part of the episode. So when, at the very end of this whole thing, they realize Tilly's going to die, Burnham's like, I don't care about the part, we got to figure, I'm not going to risk a really good person because of this nonsense.
No, you beam me in now!
You'll be revealing yourself to a pre-warp civilization. We're gonna have to answer for the Prime Directive violation.
The Hellemnites can't maintain this technology. They're gonna get wiped out sooner or later. Either way, we have to do this.
She transports into the control room where the girl's father is, because he's the head of this temple. So she's got to sit there and have a conversation with him as they free the girls and get them to life. And the dude's like, I don't know what to do. What does this all mean? Are there no gods? And Burnham has to have a really great conversation. I don't normally bring these things up because it's not really really have anything to do with what's happening in this thing. I myself am a spiritual person, a person of faith, and it's this. So this really rang for me and touched me. To have Burnham, especially in a Star Trek society that more or less has probably foregone some level of spiritualism in terms of for more of a mental awakening and all this other stuff, to have her explain to this guy, look, just because this piece that you believed isn't true, he's like, well, does that mean there's no God? She's like, that doesn't mean there isn't anything. It just means that now you know that whatever you believe includes us, but we're not part of that. Like we're people like you. There's other things in the universe. See, one of those things could very well be your gods and the things you believe in. So don't lose your faith because what you believed isn't exactly the way you believed it.
There is still what you believe. Nothing we have shown you means gods don't exist, or that the journey of the Mother come here didn't happen. It's just that now you know that there is also us.
And I believe there's a very powerful lesson there. And Star Trek always shines when it expresses ideas that big. And I felt like that was probably the one saving grace to this side of the episode and the A plot, if you will. So where does it connect to the B plot? Oh, they do the thing. They find out that there's markings that mirror the markings on the little vial. It's one of the other towers that are broken, so it's easy to get into because nobody lives there. And so they get there, they find whatever else. They find the next clue. It goes to someplace else, and they're going to figure it out. I'm sure will let us know next episode. In the B plot, to me, the far more interesting plot, Culber is dealing with what does this all mean? So he has a counseling tool he uses, which is they invent a version of his grandmother. He goes to talk to her. She's like, I can't really help you with things of faith. He's like, but you always talked about faith. She goes, yeah, but I raised you to be a scientist. I raised you to think first. And so how do you address the spirit when you haven't really looked at the body yet? So he does some scans with Stamets helping him, which is great because they get to work together. And at the end of it, they kind of come to terms with the fact he's perfectly fine. And Stamets tells him, he's like,
the scans would have picked up anything with health implications. So in lieu of that, I say, why don't you just enjoy it?
Enjoy it. How many times do we sit there and we attack other people for their belief systems when at the end of the day, what you're trying, now, I'm not talking about enforced beliefs. I'm not talking about that kind of nonsense. What I'm talking about is don't make fun of your friend who has a spiritual belief or who believes in the man in the sky. Sit there and take joy in the fact that they believe something. And then always think about what it is that you believe. I think those are really important, big ideas. It's what makes this, honestly, it was the saving grace of this episode was the Culber storyline. I genuinely feel that way. But there you go. Now you know. And if knowing's half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. Wasn't all index for this episode for me. Here's my problem. I've just recently come to my own awakening and understanding of what Discovery is or was supposed to be. And it's helped me see it and really enjoy it from a very different perspective than I started. I very much was a Discovery hater. Absolutely. Having come to the idea that it's chapters of a story, this season of the series, the final season, seems to want to hearken as strongly to classic Star Trek as much as possible in that we're getting awfully episodic chapters. And again, I don't know. Season 4 was so much better at this than season 5 is right now, in that each of these feels like they're standalone adventures. Why would you have standalone adventures in a book or in stories? I get the reasoning behind it, I guess, but they're feeding into, like, I feel like they're not staying in their lane, if that makes sense. So that's ultimately why I'm going to give the episode a 7 out of 10. All right, guys, comment below. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Did you find as some of the same connections that I did? Did you really like the A plot over the B plot? We'd totally love to hear what you think. What about the commentary that's happening in terms of spiritualism and where it stands, and when it's done right and when it's respectful and respected, I think we genuinely can coexist in a way that Star Trek has always been there for. There's an episode of Babylon 5 that did something similar where he got a chance to, Sinclair, the commander of that show, got a chance to really walk through and explain, hey, even though I am this is an atheist, this is a this is a this is a that. And he goes through all the various sci-fi religions and mainstream religions that exist. And I thought that was such a neat way to handle that particular piece of material. So comment below. Let me know again what you guys thought. I cannot wait for the next episode next week. Do me a favor. Are you enjoying the show? If you're watching the show and if you just found my show, click that playlist right there because it's going to give you everything from this season. And if you want to know a little bit more about Discovery, click right there about what I'm talking about when I say that I have come to an awakening. All right, guys, I'll talk to you again very soon. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.